Hey, happy Friday the 13th. How you doing? Mr. H here with you on planet Earth. Hope you're having a great time. We made it through the week and here we are once again on a Friday. And what have I been hearing all week? Well, I've been hearing everything as well as you know about the new Middle Eastern war that started and everybody at school's asking me, Mr. H, what's this whole thing about? Well, Mr. H always tries to be objective, and I always try to avoid, contemporary stuff. But hey, this is history happening right in front of us, so looks like we're going to take a quick look at the Middle East and why it is the way it is. First of all, it's the Middle East. Wars have been fought there since 3500 BC and even further back. This is not the last Middle Eastern war, and there's going to be a lot more after that, but just one we have right now. Now, the roots of recent Middle Eastern conflict go back there to 1948. The British used to own Israel, Jordan, Iraq, and they called the west side of that mandatory Palestine. It was a mandate given to them by the League of Nations. They're supposed to run it until it becomes independent. And Great Britain had promised the Jewish people a homeland in their original homeland, but there were people already living there. Mandatory Palestine, Palestinians. And they decided the smart thing to do would be just to kind of divide the whole area up, according to their own census figures. The problem here is that, as you can see, the Palestinian area is split up into three. The Israeli area is this long, like snake-like thing here, where it's only 10 miles wide at some places. So I'm not sure it really a coherent nation for either side. And of course, who owns Jerusalem? It's sacred to both Christianity and Islam. On paper, it sounds like a great idea, but you know as well as I do, paper and reality, when they clash, it's not just ink. They end up shooting at each other sometimes, and it's the Middle East, so that's exactly what happens. We have what we call the Israeli War of Independence from 1948 to 1949. Palestinian and Israeli forces clash over what they feel is to be their land. We have newly independent Arab nations such as Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon coming in. Their armies are not very well organized because they've been independent for about 30 minutes. The only army that really seems to be able to function very well is Egypt's, would have a lot of experience in fighting, against the Africa Corps. And the Israelis, they have a lot of sympathy. A lot of veterans show up, and there's a lot of excess Second World War equipment floating around. Ends up on both sides. Occasionally, some of the same kinds of equipment. They can't tell who's on whose side. So it's kind of a disorganized kind of war, and all wars in the Middle East tend to be pretty bad. There's a lot of atrocities on both sides they've not forgotten about. They kind of made it up as they went along. You see U.S. Sherman tanks over there. Here's an Israeli using what appears to be a First World War British machine gun. And it looks like they mounted a mortar on top of it. So a lot of this is making up as they go along. Lots of chaos, lots of death, and it's just really a bad thing. But the Israelis, having the advantage of interior lines, are able to hold off the fairly newly constructed armies of Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, and they managed to actually hold off the Egyptians. And Israel ends up winning, and we have an independent state of Israel. Here's the raising of the ink flag down there in the southern port of Eilat. This is considered the final battle of the Israeli War of Independence. It's kind of the Israeli version of raising the flag at Iwo Jima. They call it the ink flag because somebody made it in a home nearby, and not a lot of print shops in the middle of a war, so they kind of had to make do with what they had. Strangely enough, they come up with these borders, and they look fairly similar to what was proposed, except in the north. As you notice, there doesn't really appear to be a Palestinian enclave up there. But the West Bank belongs to Jordan, the Gaza Strip belongs to Egypt, so the Palestinians don't have a homeland, but they do have some protectors. A lot of other Palestinians would go into South Lebanon. Syria's got the Golan Heights there, so really not that many went in that direction. So 1949 borders are as thus. So it looks like maybe this could actually function. It could be economically viable. But, you can see all kinds of problems with this particular setup. Yeah, look at that. 9 miles across from the West Bank to Netanya. And Tel Aviv is the capital, and it's 11 miles away from the West Bank. So if the Jordanians ever decide to punch forward on a massive offensive, there's not a lot of time to react, and Israel get cut in half fairly quickly. Strangely enough, there isn't a major war for a while. There's skirmishes, and people don't like each other, and they've declared eternal war against each other. But after 1949, there's no major combat in the Middle East. Maybe because they're putting armies back together, they're starting to work, they're getting Soviet equipment now. That's part of the reason. But then in 1956, Israel's the one that goes on the attack. It's called the Suez War. Egypt decided to nationalize the Suez Canal. Well, French and British, who owned it, decided they didn't like this. They're going to take the Suez Canal away from the Egyptians. But they needed a little bit of help. So what happened is they got Israel to attack Egypt, which is the strongest Arab military at the time. And the Egyptians and French are going to jump in as peacekeepers, right, to keep the Israelis and the Egyptians away. So they have to make sure that the Israelis get to the Suez Canal and that the Egyptian-French peacekeeping force, put that in quotes, are able to keep the Egyptians and Israelis separated, and the Israelis are going to grab the Sinai Peninsula, maybe to hang on to forever, maybe to use as a bargaining chip. It doesn't work out so great. Militarily, yes, the Israelis grab all the Sinai Peninsula, but now they look like the aggressor. The French and the British, I mean, what are you doing there in the first place, man? A lot of people wondering. They can see through this. And it was so bad that there is a UN resolution calling on the French and British to leave, and the United States and Soviet Union voted yes on the same side. Yeah, that tells you how screwed up that was. So there's Suez Canal allegedly from the first day of the war. Probably. Don't know. Looks awful calm for a war zone. But that's why it's so important, right? You got to try to get from the Mediterranean down to the Red Sea. And whoever owns it, British and French, make a lot of money. Now, if the Egyptians have nationalized it, they own it. And they can decide who comes in and who comes out. So Britain and France go in, their last great imperial adventure together. Now, had this been 1886, yeah, they would have pulled it off. In fact, the British did pull it off in 1882. The French, of course, owned Syria and Lebanon for the longest time. But now it's 1956. It's 10 years after the Second World War. You guys are still broke. All right, you're getting all your budgets coming from the United States Treasury over here, and now you're like to run off on some wild imperial adventure. So out of control and so insane and badly conceived that the United States and the Soviet Union both condemned France and Britain. So yeah, it backfired. So the French and the British have to back off, and the Israelis have to hand back the Sinai Peninsula. Thinking the whole time, man, this would have been a fantastic bargaining chip. They kept that in mind, right? Learn from history. So they remembered how they had the Sinai and had to give it back. They said, next time, we're going to get something for it. So 1956 is just kind of an embarrassment for everybody. And it pushes the Arab world closer to the Soviet Union. In 1967, we got the Six-Day War. Israel had been thinking about this for a while. Usually you don't fight on two fronts. Israel decided to fight on three. And you don't do something like this unless you've really been thinking about it for a very long time. Yep, and apparently thought about it for about 11 years. Israel and Egypt, tensions are rising. There's skirmishes all the time. Same thing with Jordan and Syria. Occasionally lob a few shells over the border into Lebanon. They very quietly get all their pieces in position, and they do the craziest thing imaginable. They attack on three fronts. They attack into Egypt, they attack into the Jordanian West Bank, and they go into the Golan Heights of Syria at the same time. Three different directions. This is absolutely insane. And the thing about insane stuff is either blows up on you or it works beyond your wildest dreams. And it's definitely a case of the latter for Israel in 1967. They take the entire West Bank away from Jordan. They overrun the entire Sinai Peninsula and throw the Egyptians back on the other side of Suez Canal. Except this time they're not leaving, right? And over in the Golan Heights, those big hills that you can shell northern Israel from, well, now it belongs to the Israelis, and they can shell Damascus with some long-range artillery from there if they have to. How did Israel pull off such a wild victory? Well, the Air Force. They decided we're going to catch everybody on the ground, and that's what they did. They nailed the Egyptian Air Force before they ever had a chance to get off the runway. The Syrians, the Jordanians, everything. They had control of the air, so now if the Israeli ground forces run into problem, boom, the Israelis can attack from the air. You can only face to the front or face up, but you can't do both at the same time, especially not in 1967. The Israeli Air Force smashes everything in front of everybody, and the Army comes in right behind. So they had a lot of air-land cooperation here, right? You don't see that a lot of times in some armies. It's hard for them to coordinate this kind of stuff. The Israelis have been practicing for a long time. They coordinated, and they got lots of prisoners. That was another thing. See the Egyptian prisoners in the truck over there in their underwear? Instead of just gunning people down and shooting the prisoners, like that happens a lot in Middle Eastern wars, they just told them to surrender, and boom, off we go. They surrender, and you grab all their equipment. You keep running. You don't have to fight so much. Another thing is logistics. Right? You don't hear a lot about logistics because, it's not the glorious part of all these wars. The Israelis had their fuel supplies already built up for a long time, even having civilian shortages before the war broke out. And they had already decided which roads they were going to lead. They had spies on the road, so they knew exactly where to go, where the traps could possibly be set. And once they put everything in motion, boom, it worked like you wouldn't believe. Now, the problem is when you win a big victory like this, you get kind of complacent. The guy who loses remembers losing. The guy who wins thinks he could do the same thing again. The guy who lost, who remembers, is remembering what he did wrong. He's going to come up with his own strategy. You can tell I've watched a lot of Steelers Ravens games, right? That's what's going to happen. We beat up on Baltimore. We're going to play them again in a few weeks, and they're going to remember what happened to them. Well, Egypt and Syria remembered what happened. They thought about it, and they waited and waited for a chance to get back at the Israelis. And the Israelis, in their hubris, thinking they could easily defeat another Arab coalition, well, when you have hubris, you get visited by nemesis, right? And they even had an accident with the USS Liberty where the Israelis actually sank an American ship. It was gaining all kinds of intelligence and how the Arab states communicated with each other. Without that knowledge, 1973 probably was much worse than it could have been. The Yom Kippur War, the Syrians and the Egyptians hit back. They pick a major holiday, Yom Kippur, and they attack on two fronts. Yeah, the Israelis pulled it off on three because they were thinking about it and caught the Arabs off guard. This time, the Arabs have been thinking about it and they catch the Israelis off guard. In fact, it was such a secret in Egypt that the armed forces going to the Suez Canal were going for maneuvers and had absolutely no idea they were going into battle. Suddenly, the fire department shows up, starts spraying water on the other side of the Suez Canal and the dunes to harden it, and next thing you know, tanks are going over into the Israeli side. They bomb the Israelis. Same thing's happening up in Syria, fighting in the mountains. And this time, the Israeli Air Force comes swarming in like they did last time. Not this time because the Egyptians and Syrians have the element of surprise, and they're waiting for the Israeli Air Force. They have an integrated Air Force defense system, AIDS, where interlocking fields of fire, and the Israeli Air Force is taking a beating. And suddenly, boom, the Egyptians have made it across the canal, and they're driving the Israelis back across to Sinai. Over in Syria, the Syrians made some progress in the mountains, and then they kind of stalled out and started getting pushed back. But the problem is, Israel's caught on two fronts, right? And they're getting pushed back across to Sinai. Eventually, they're going to stop the Egyptians. In the southern part of Sinai, they'll push them actually back across the canal, and the Israelis actually make it to Africa briefly. All right, but the point is, the Egyptians got the drop on them. Right? Israel got caught off guard. See the Israeli plane again blown up on the runway. A lot of their tanks got hit because now the Egyptians had control of the sky. So Israel got caught off guard in 73, and of course people remember that. We'll get to that a little bit later on. So Egypt got a moral victory. Maybe they didn't crush the Israelis, maybe they didn't drive them all the way back to Israel, but they got the drop on them. They dinged the Israeli armor of invincibility. And Egypt, it's like the Rocky movie, right? Maybe Rocky didn't beat Apollo Creed, but he took him the distance. And because of this, Israel and Egypt can negotiate almost as equals. So Egypt got the moral victory out of this. Syria and Israel still can't stand each other. That wasn't going to change. This is what's going to lead to the Camp David Accords and things like this, because of this moral victory, the Egyptians can actually negotiate as near equals with the Israelis. So that's the end of the war. See how far the Egyptians got at one point? Right, the southern part, they kind of lost it again, but they did jump across. They did push the Israelis back. They beat them in a couple of battles. Yes, the Egyptian armed forces, quite capable as well. Could have been a lot worse then, too, because Nixon was the United States was backing Israel and the Soviet Union backing the Arab nations. At one point, they thought there was going to be a nuclear exchange, but it wasn't going to happen. Still, got a little scary there when the Soviet Union put 6 airborne divisions on alert and said they were going to jump into Syria when they found out the United States was resupplying Israel. So, this thing could have escalated. Fortunately, these are not very large countries, Israel, Egypt, and Syria, and the thing kind of petered out. So October 6th, October 23rd didn't last long enough, and the whole U.S.-Soviet thing just kind of faded out with them, too. Well, you know how it goes in the Middle East. Another decade, another war. Everything's kind of calm till 1982. In 75, Lebanon has a civil war. The Palestinians that have been in South Lebanon, they've been launching attacks into Israel, trying to win back what they believe to be their homeland. Eventually, it got to the point where the Israelis intervened on the ground. In 78, they had a large combined arms operation at Tyre, and they backed away after that. And all the Palestinians and all those groups just flooded back in again. So in 1982, we got the Lebanon War. The Israelis invade Lebanon all the way to Beirut. Their idea is to push the Palestinians out. And, unless you hang on to it forever, it's not going to happen, because the minute you pull back, everybody floods back in again. Israel and Syria were running into each other. The Israelis remembered how the Air Force was so great in 67, how it did so good in 73, and 1982. Yep, the Israelis lose 3 planes, the Syrians lose 121. So they figured their way around the Syrian anti-aircraft defenses. Rumor has it there were North Koreans and Russians there too, but we don't know that. So in Lebanon, we've got, a massive fight from 82 to 83 there up in Beirut. We know about the, peacekeeping mission with the Marines. We're not going to get too deep into that. And then there was just sporadic skirmishes, guerrilla wars until 1985. The Israeli ground forces had to go into Lebanon. And what happens when you take over hostile territory? You got to hang on to it. The people there don't want you there. You've got some shootings. You lose a guy here. You lose a guy there. They don't push you out, but it just goes on forever. And after a while, everybody gets tired of it. So the Israelis pull back to this buffer zone. That's not really a buffer zone. Got the UN peacekeeping force there. See, UNIFIL. They don't really stop, any Palestinian groups from coming in. The buffer zone the Israelis are sitting on, that gets infiltrated all the time. So it's the Middle East, man. Right? No one's even upset. Just another day in the Middle East. Now let's fast forward to 2023. A lot of things have changed between the Lebanon War and 2023. We had a quasi-peace agreement here where Gaza and the West Bank kind of ran themselves. And it wasn't perfect. In 2006, Hamas had taken over Gaza. They had launched attacks against Israel before 2006 and 2014. They had something that 2021 they called the Gaza War. In 2023, on Yom Kippur, somehow, someway, Hamas launches 5,000 missiles into Israel. And how Israel did not see this coming is quite a surprise. They were caught off guard at Yom Kippur in 1973. They caught off guard at Yom Kippur in 2023. And there are also a lot of attacks coming out of Gaza into Israel. So the Israeli army, everyone's on leave for Yom Kippur, so they're running back. So we've got lots of fighting. We've got a hostage situation. The Israelis have cut off, food and water and everything to Gaza. There's shelling. There's airstrikes. They've called up their reserves. Everyone's massing in front of Gaza. So We're not really sure what's going to happen. You can listen to the talking heads predicting there's going to be a ground assault, which could possibly happen, but it's going to turn to a Middle Eastern Stalingrad if that happens. And like I said, these aren't very big countries, so something else is probably going to happen before this thing ends. Well, I don't mean to end it on a negative note like that, but like I've said before, it's the Middle East, right? It's happened before, it's happened now, it'll happen again in the future. Hopefully we learn something positive and constructive to avoid this, but, it is what it is. All right, on that happy note, let's talk about paleoart. Yeah, Charles Knight. Have you ever heard about this guy? This is our original paleo artist. Back in the turn of the 19th and 20th century, he was famous for his own reconstruction of prehistoric animals. He's famous for dinosaurs, but he does all prehistoric animals. And a lot of our knowledge up into about the 60s, 70s, even 80s on what dinosaurs looked like or moved or anything was all based on this guy's paintings. He's from Brooklyn, by the way. He worked in a natural history museum. Once again, reconstructing dinosaurs and fossils when we knew nothing about it. He was the guy who came up with the original model for Stegosaurus. We know how that went from last week. And here's Droidosaurus, and we call fighting dinosaurs. And why is this painting so important? Because a lot of people before about the 60s or 70s thought dinosaurs were cold-blooded, very slow, sluggish kind of animals, right? These guys don't look sluggish, do they? No, this is active, moving around. Yeah, I think this is closer. This came out long before this painting. I think was in the 30s at some point. So he kind of jump-started the dinosaur renaissance almost a half century. So he had a pretty good idea from looking at the bones and being an animal anatomic expert that he figured these things probably moved a lot faster than people thought. They could jump around a lot, move very quickly, active animals, and when you see teeth and claws like that, yeah, you got to move fast to use them against something else that moves just as fast as you do. This was the first painting he had, not even a dinosaur, Eleutherium. I know, what Tacitus once said, great things start with small beginnings, right? And his entire career began with this painting, the Eleutherium. No one even remembers this because, it's not the most exciting animal. But someone paid him to paint what this thing must have looked like based on the fossils they found. So, hey, the rent's due next week. This is one of my favorites, actually. Here we are with T-Rex and Triceratops. It's another interesting painting because, once again, these animals don't look sluggish. Look at T-Rex over here. It's not dragging his tail, leaning forward, maybe because he's preparing to attack. And there's another one in the distance. Now, I don't know if he's just hanging out to look around or something. I don't know. But see how it's upright? He's dragging his tail over here. But I got the feeling he's just kind of looking around, maybe for another, Triceratops or something. But this Tyrannosaurus right here in the front, definitely active, preparing to attack sort of position. This is an active predator, maybe warm-blooded. Here's another T-Rex. I kind of like the other one a bit more. This was earlier in his career. See, it's kind of dragging the tail. Doesn't look that active. Does he have enough claws on his hand? I just realized that. Is that 2 or 3? Well, T-Rex got to have 2. So if that's 3, it's something else. But nonetheless, it's a theropod of some type. This one doesn't look quite as active as the other ones. But remember, this painting was from earlier in his career when everyone thought they were slow-moving animals. Here's a T-Rex brawl. I'm pretty sure they fought each other. What I find funny about this picture is look at the face of the one biting the other one in the backbone. But he's having fun, isn't he? He's having a great time. That's probably what Lamar Jackson saw as T.J. Watt was closing in on him in the Steeler victory. Hey, here's Protoceratops hanging out in the Gobi Desert. Remember we got this one from Fighting Dinosaurs, the fossils they found, locked in battle with what we think might have been a velociraptor. Well, here they are, Protoceratops hanging out with some of their friends here. Nice desert scene. This guy's eating some plants, just kind of chilling. It's kind of what you do in the desert, right? You don't want to run around too much, especially not in summer. I think this is a Tylosaurus. I'm not really sure. I mean, I'm not sure if this is supposed to be a painting or something he wrote on the back of a napkin over there at the cafeteria at the Natural History Museum. But yeah, it's kind of a funny sort of picture. I never thought of Tylosaurus, if that's what this thing is, having a frill on the back of the head. And there's a terrified sea turtle. So, I'm pretty sure that's the action is accurate. We'll just go with that. Hey, here's one of my favorites, Dimetrodon, right? Dimotrodon, the British say. Well, funny people, the British. Here's Dimetrodon. It's fairly accurate, I think. Everyone sort of agrees. And it's got the splayed out posture there with the legs. A lot of people, there's the debate. Remember, we talked about a few shows back where the legs are underneath or splayed out to the side. He's going with the splayed out to the side. Not quite as much as we thought. Not quite like a alligator or crocodile. But, it's definitely got some stuff there. Dimetrodon. Here's just generic Paleozoic here. You see, Charles Knight is not confined to any one era. You know what those two guys on the top are? We talked about them one time before, right? Gorgonopsid. And there's another Gorgonopsid down there. It looks smaller. It must be one of those take your kids to work sort of thing. I'm not sure what kind of an animal they're cornering, but, they have a name for it, and I think it's called lunch. That's a pretty nice photo here. Look at this. It's a photo, I'm sorry. Pretty nice picture. Something living in a swamp here in the Paleozoic, and the most dangerous predator on the planet at the time is about to turn that thing into shredded wheat, man. Hey, how about the mammoth? This is a pretty interesting one, too. Um, Mammoths, both North America and Asia, is where these things, they started in Asia, came across to North America. And we're not really sure who's attacking. A lot of people, because you remember it's in the 30s, 40s, 50s, maybe even the 20s, speculate these are Native Americans because you see feathers a little bit. But the thing I noticed first was that atlatl is holding. So a lot of people say that's something from the Americas, but not quite, right? Because the atlatl, which helps extend your arm basically, so you throw your spear further, has been found in Siberia too. So Charles Knight is probably laughing, and everybody's trying to figure out this is North America or Asia, and he's probably said, I just painted it to paint it. So I guess that's up to you whether you think it's Asia or North America. But if you're looking for a reason why mammoths became extinct, yep, Homo sapiens, there we are. Climate change probably didn't help, but Homo sapiens, the most dangerous animal this world has ever seen. Not just to others, but to each other as well. How about the Irish elk? That's another one I've always liked too. The Irish elk. This was the inspiration, believe it or not, for the Canadian football team, the Edmonton Elks. They're originally called the Edmonton Eskimos. In 2020, it was deemed as a somewhat offensive name, which a lot of people were wondering about. So they switched over to Edmonton Elks, and I'll be honest with you, I like that new name better. I like Edmonton Elks. Of course, I like elks too. Such a majestic animal. Elks are pretty big. Back then, even bigger in the Ice Age. The Irish elk has been found across the entire northern hemisphere, but mainly Ireland's where they found it first, hence Irish elk. And the Irish are very proud of this. They don't want you to call it a prehistoric elk. They will get very upset and tell you it's an Irish elk. All right, so, okay. You want to get in good with the Irish ambassador? Talk about the Irish elk. And, of course, the saber-toothed cat. Not the tiger, the cat. Remember that one a few weeks back there? I was shouting about that. Yeah, this is a picture a lot of people have seen. Ironically, this picture tends to show up in a lot of history books about Native American history. I mean, well, it's clearly North American animal. It made its way down to South America, so it's always kind of frightening to think that human eyes have actually seen this animal. So, and usually if you see it, it's generally the last thing you ever see, especially this close. And here, a picture from the future. We can always hope, right? Maybe the dinosaurs come back. Michelle said, it's kind of a terrifying picture. Why would you want this to happen? I said, don't you like dinosaurs? She says she likes dinosaurs. Doesn't want to see them destroy civilization, no. Well, if they don't do it, we're going to end up doing it. So might as well have some fun at the end of the world, right? Hey, let's talk about some football real quick. Steelers, they got a bye week coming up. They got LA in 2 weeks, but they got a bye week. Lots of people were saying the Steelers did not have a chance. Listen up, man. Okay, games are not played on paper. Nothing is played on paper. Paper is nice, but at the end of the day, someone's got to go out and do it. And the Steelers did it. They knocked off the Baltimore Ravens 17-10. They took their sweet time about it. They're down 10-3 going into the fourth period. But once they finally got it together, boom, there's Lamar Jackson getting crushed under the steel curtain. Kenny Pickens made a beautiful audible in a pass to George Pickett. They're beating the Ravens. You can see right there why the Ravens lost. Number 44, first of all, you're trailing a receiver. Number 2, you're out of shape, obviously, staring down at the ground. And number 3, I don't know where the safety is, unless 44 is the safety. They changed up the numbers this year. But why is the safety way out there on the sideline anyway, right? Yeah, that's why the Ravens lost. 17-10, Steelers won. We'll play them again this year. Remember what I said, the guy who loses always remembers. So don't get complacent, Pittsburgh. Don't let hubris get to you, because Nemesis will pop up around the corner. But you'll remember something. Everyone said the Steelers had no chance. Anything is possible if you believe and you work hard enough. You could do anything, including levitate. But yeah, don't try that. Okay, please don't try that at home. You're just gonna hurt yourself. All right, you guys. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. Don't worry about Friday the 13th. It's just a day on the calendar. But on Friday around 5 o'clock, be careful driving. Everybody's trying to get home. So, I don't know, maybe leave early if you can. Or if you stay to 5:30, looks good and you miss most of the traffic, right? You guys have a fantastic day. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Be nice to each other. I'll see you next week. Das vidanya.